Good evening, everyone. Glad y'all are taking the time out to watch this video. The elders have asked me over the next few weeks to do some videos. Until we get back to gathering together, face to face in the auditorium on Wednesday nights. Hopefully that'll be soon. But in the meantime, I'm going to be teaching a few Wednesday night classes online. Probably going to be just uploading these to YouTube, as you're probably watching it right now through YouTube. And I started to go back into Romans where we left off in our auditorium class, but I would rather just wait until we're face to face. So in the meantime, I thought we'd go over something a little bit different. The topic that I'm going to look at it's one of my favorites. One of my favorites, throughout the Bible. It's just a section, but it's the Sermon on the Mount, the one that probably most of y'all are very familiar with. It's one that's been there's been no telling how many sermons have been preached on this sermon, but it's just one of my favorite sections of the Bible. And I think one of the reasons for it is because the Sermon on the Mount is basically a guidebook for Christian living. All right, that's really what the Sermon on the Mount is in a nutshell. That being said, it is not one of the easiest sections to adopt. It's not one of the sections that you just read and say, oh, man, that's simple enough. I can do this. I'm going to be honest with you. Whenever I read the Sermon on the Mount, whenever I do a lot of studying on it, I'll be honest with you, my feet get pretty sore because it does a lot of stepping on my toes. And another thing, this is a section that, in my opinion, we should all individually, personally, I think we all need to spend a lot of time on, often, is the Sermon on the Mount and everything that Jesus is telling this group of people that he's talking to and to us as Christians today. One thing that I want to point out here before we kind of get started in the Sermon on the Mount, which by the way is Matthew chapter 5. That's where we're going to be spending the next few weeks, or that's where we're going to start at. But one thing that I want to point out is that everything, especially tonight, this first section tonight, everything that Jesus is talking about has to do with our hearts. Okay, this is going to be the focus. This is one of the focus on the Sermons on the Mount is your heart, and where is your heart at? And that's also what I want your focus to be. As we go over this, I want you to think about your heart. This study over the next however many weeks is a study about you. It's a study that requires you. It's a study that requires me to do some serious self-reflection, to do some serious self-evaluation and really be honest with yourselves. And I'll be honest with y'all. I'm weak in so many of these areas. So, I'm preaching to myself as much as I am to any of y'all. The Sermon on the Mount, the group of people that he's talking to, potential Christians, no doubt about it. Some, probably already were, but it speaks to us as Christians today. It tells us what our attitudes and what our actions should be, and it really challenges us to live a very distinctive and a very different life. The opening part on the Sermon on the Mount, and the part that we're going to focus on tonight, is one that we commonly refer to as the Beatitudes. It's located in the first 12 verses of chapter 5. So we're going to be looking at Matthew chapter 5, verses 1 through 12 tonight. Now, just to kind of give you a little bit of a summary, I guess you could say, of the Sermon on the Mount. Sermon on the Mount is a collection of 8 different characteristics. That's, some say there's 9, some say there's 10, but there's really just 8 different characteristics that separates Christians from the rest of the world. Now, it's important to remember these are not 8 different sets of people. These aren't 8 different people that Jesus is describing. These are 8 different characteristics. Big difference there. And these are 8 characteristics that we as Christians must strive to maintain, must strive to adopt, and as part of our lifestyle. In these, Jesus isn't just asking the people to change their behaviors. He wants a radical change in their lives. And also, he wants a radical change in their view of the world. Another thing that I want to really specify here, Jesus isn't telling these people, live like this and you'll be a Christian. What Jesus is saying, because you're a Christian, because you're a follower of me, because you're this, I want you to live like this. Now that you're a Christian, I want you to live like this. The way that he's about to tell these people in the section that we're going to look at tonight also, and really all of the Sermon on the Mount. Now that you're a Christian, I need you to live like this. That's why this section is so important. Beatitudes is actually the English word. It comes from the Latin word beatus or beatus, B-E-A-T-U-S. And if I only gave you one guess to what that word means, you could probably guess it. It means blessed. If you've read Beatitudes at all, the word blessed is used often. Blessed. It's a word that we say a lot. It's a word that we hear a lot. But what does it actually mean? The definition that I found, it says the ultimate well-being and distinctive spiritual joy of those who share in the salvation of the kingdom of God. Great definition. Really, being blessed is more than, it's really more than just about being happy. It's about having this inner joy of calmness, this inner contentment that really comes not by chance. A lot of times we don't say we're not lucky, we're blessed. It doesn't come by chance, but it comes from one source, from God. Happiness, looking at the difference between happiness and blessed. Happiness is something that's probably a lot easier to find than being blessed. That's not what Jesus is focusing on here. Jesus starts off all these with blessed are, and he goes through 8 different ones. So let's look at the Beatitudes. The first one is found in Matthew chapter 5, verse 3. The opening 2 verses there, kind of like an introduction, but he starts in Matthew chapter 5, verse 3. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. All right, this is obviously the first beatitude, but this is a very important one. This is a foundational beatitude. It's really important that we understand this one because almost all, if not all, reach back to this one. Okay, and we'll go over that a little bit more detail later on. But it's really important that we understand this one before we start going on to the others because they tie in. So many of them tie back to this very first one that we find in verse 3. So let's look at it. What does poor in spirit mean? Now, one thing that it doesn't mean, and one thing that I don't want us to get confused with, it doesn't mean poor-spirited. Poor-spirited, meaning a lack of motivation, a lack of drive. Poor in spirit, somebody who is poor in spirit, means it's a complete absence of pride, a complete absence of self-reliance. If I were to describe poor in spirit in one word, if I were just to put one word behind it, it would be humble or humility. It's really a consciousness of the fact that we are nothing without God. We're nothing without God in our lives. The literal translation of the word poor, the way that it's used here, is to shrink, like to shrink down or to cower down. Essentially this is an inward attitude that we have nothing to be proud about in ourselves. As far as ourselves are concerned, we are spiritually poor. We're bankrupt without God in our lives. Now, this doesn't, being poor in spirit, a lot of times we think of poor as not having much. It doesn't have anything to do with financial status either. It's possible to be the richest person in the world, but still be poor in spirit. It's also possible to be, homeless and on the streets, but don't feel that you need God in your life. So, your financial status has nothing to do with whether or not you are poor in spirit. Being poor in spirit has a lot to do with where your focus is. It has to be an inward view instead of an outward one. Being poor in spirit, it doesn't matter who your parents are. It doesn't matter what your job is, how much money you make, where you were born. Being poor in spirit means you approach God humbly and not proud. And what a refreshing thing that this has got to be to the group that Jesus is talking to. We know a lot about the Pharisees in the day. Some of the bad Pharisees. That I guess all of them have gotten the reputation for just for a select group of them. But they were so proud of who they were, what they were born into, the things that they had done. And Jesus is saying, look, we're going to shift our focus here a little bit. So I'm sure this is a refreshing statement to hear from Jesus. A person who is blessed is the one who has been spiritually changed rather than externally changed. I was looking at, for different examples throughout the Bible, especially throughout the New Testament, of people that were poor in spirit, people that weren't poor in spirit. And the one that's, as I've probably described this, you're probably popped in your head a lot quicker than it did mine. But it's one of the Pharisee and the tax collector. And I'm gonna read that. It's in Luke chapter 18, verses 9 through 14. Again, this is just a great example of what Jesus is talking about, being poor in spirit, and then we see the exact opposite of that. So Luke chapter 18, verses 9 through 14. He says, he also told this parable to some who trusted in themselves that they were righteous and treated others with contempt. He says, two men went up into the temple to pray, one a Pharisee, the other a tax collector. The Pharisee, standing by himself, prayed thus. He says, God, I thank you that I am not like the other men, extortioners, unjust, adulterers, or even like this tax collector. I fast twice a week. I give tithes of all I get. But the tax collector, standing far off, would not even lift his eyes up to heaven, but beat his breast, saying, God, be merciful to me, a sinner. I tell you, this man went down to his house justified rather than the other. For everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, but the one who humbles himself will be exalted. This is the perfect example of what Jesus is talking about, being poor in spirit. Obviously, the one that's poor in spirit is the tax collector, the one that knew he was nothing. He was nothing without God in his life. And we see the one who wasn't poor in spirit, obviously, was the Pharisee, the one who just says, God, I'm just glad I'm not like him. So to me, those are just the perfect examples, the ones that just show you exactly what Jesus is talking about, the approach, the mindset that we have to take as being poor in spirit. Okay, so let's move on. Again, keep in mind the one that we just talked about in verse 3 is one of the most important ones, because so many others tie back to it. We're going to see that again right here in the next one. Verse 4, blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Now, what could they possibly be mourning about back at, when Jesus said this? It could probably be, several different things, same things that we mourn for today. Poverty was pretty rampant back then. It could be the loss of a loved one, obviously. It could be the loss of land, just, so many different things that people could be mourning on. However, I'm convinced Jesus has never been, one to talk about material things. And I don't think this is a case where it's any different. I believe this one ties back to the one that we just looked at. And I believe this comes as a reaction. The mourning comes as a reaction when you have adopted this first one. After you have become poor in spirit. After you've got to the point where maybe you've realized your past lifestyle, or maybe the priorities that you have had in your life don't line up to what Jesus is now talking about, or what Jesus is now asking for. So I think the mourning that he's talking about, the sadness, comes as a result of repenting and just realizing that you've made mistakes in your life, but now it's time to put those things behind you and start living for God. But the mourning comes as a result that you finally you've pushed yourself to be poor in spirit, and you finally realized the past life that you've been living. You feel sorry for it. I mean, you not feel sorry for it, but you regret it. And I believe this is what the mourning that Jesus is talking about. He says, you may mourn, you may be sorry for it, but you will be comforted. You will eventually be comforted for it. Okay, let's move on to verse number 5. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Now, what does meek mean? And, I was trying to think of some different people, throughout the Bible that were, classified as meek, or people that I thought of, were meek. One person that I know specifically talks about is in Numbers chapter 12, verse 3, and it specifically says Moses. He says, now the man Moses was very meek above all the men who were upon the face of the earth. Meekness is not something that we usually strive for, right? It's not something that we usually try to say, I'm going to go out and be meek today. Usually we kind of associate meekness with somebody who's weak for whatever reason. But that's not what Jesus is talking about. In the business world and absolutely in the sports world, you don't hear anything about being meek. It's always be assertive, run the next guy in the ground, push him out of your way, take the bull by the horns. It's take over. Don't let them get ahead of you. I'll give you a quick story, I guess, on meekness and how meekness in the sports world and meekness in spiritual world are two totally different things. When Lane was 3, he played his first season at soccer, and as when your kids are little and when they're older too, we as parents should obviously be working really hard at trying to instill really good Christian values, and we try to teach Lane and Grace, be good to everybody, be nice to them, be kind, talk to them, be friends with people, don't steal, don't steal, right? So whenever Lane gets out on the floor for the first time, and we got a little scrimmage toward the end of practice. Lane's dribbling down the field, and a kid comes up, takes the ball away from him, and goes and scores. Okay, it's fine, first time. So later in the game, a kid gets the ball away, dribbles by Lane. Lane just backs up, lets him go. And we're like, Lane, get the ball. Let's get the ball. Don't just let him score. So anyway, it goes on, and Lane never tries to steal the ball from him. So we're driving back home, and it's like, hey, whenever they're not on your team, the kids with a different color jersey on, they're not on your team. So whenever they dribble by, just get the ball from them and go and score. And Lane said, you told me to never steal. So that's when that's when the meekness that we try to teach sometimes doesn't really line up to the sports world or to the business world or however you want to look at it. But that's one, I guess, scenario where it kind of come back to bite me. But again, I think this beatitude really ties back to the first one. It's all about being humble. That's what meekness is really all about. It's about being humble. Those who humbly acknowledge their dependence really on God's grace. It's a combination of being humble. It's a combination of also of being patient and also surrendering yourself. Actually, this beatitude ties back to Psalm chapter 37, verse 11. This is word for word. It says, but the meek shall inherit the land and delight themselves in abundant peace. Verse 5 says, blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Almost, identical word for word. Being meek isn't so much about our attitude towards each other as it is our attitude before God. Being meek requires us to consider ourselves as God's servants also. Meekness really stems from two different things. And one is about my attitude toward myself, and also my attitude toward God, and how do I approach Him, my position before God. All right, let's move on to verse 6. The next beatitude, it says, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Now, here's a question here, and one that it almost seems obvious, but we've really got to look at this. What does hunger and thirst mean as it's used here? Most of us don't know what hunger means. Most of us don't know what hunger is. We don't know what thirst really is. A lot of us have been hungry, like I'm hungry now, but we don't know what it's like to be hungry, the way that Jesus is talking about right here. the example in the Bible that I think is probably closest to what he's talking about here. Let's go back to the prodigal son. Remember when he was with, he had left his dad and he was with the pigs. And he was happy to just get the scraps that the pigs didn't eat, right? That's how hungry he got. And then he realized that wasn't enough to fill him. So what did he do? Goes back to his dad. That's the hunger that Jesus is talking about. That's the hunger. This is the way that you strive for righteousness. Not just a little bit of a, okay, I'm going to, I want to pursue this if it's convenient. This is, my life depends on this, and I'm going to pursue it. This is the magnitude that Jesus is talking about. It's not just a halfway approach, well, if it's convenient. This is, my life depends on this, I'm going to pursue it. Now, the next question, what is righteousness? A word that we use a lot, a word that we think about a lot. It's a longing to be holy. That's if I can kind of summarize it in a nutshell, it's a longing to be holy. It's not being perfect, but it's a striving. It's striving to live a holy life. And part of that is also a longing to get rid of things in your life that pull you away from God. And y'all know how many things there are out there to pull us away from God. I think a lot of times we're really good about focusing on getting rid of the bad things in our lives, right? We really focus on things that we know we shouldn't be doing. And we're really good at singling those out and doing our best to just get those out of our lives. However, I don't know that we're great at adding things in our lives that make us better, or taking things out of our lives that don't push us to be better. And I think we just kind of stop whenever we think, well, I'm not doing bad, so I'm fine. But are you actively seeking to be righteous, or are you just living? I think Jesus is saying there's more to it than just trying to get the bad things out of your life, but it's actively pursuing a righteous lifestyle is what Jesus is talking about here. And how do we apply that? Focus on the things that make you righteous. Whether it's, your attitudes, whether it's the people that you hang out with, the music that you listen to, the places that you go. Everything in your life has an effect on you. Everything does. Strive to fill your life with the things that make you want to be more righteous. All right, let's move on to the next one, verse number 7. He says, "Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy." This is one that puts a smile on my face, and I'll tell you why. Another trait of a true believer is one that shows mercy. A lot of times I think when we think of mercy, we think of grace. They kind of go hand in hand. Grace is when love is undeserved. And mercy, a lot of times we say is grace in action. That's we hear that a lot. If we want to imitate God, we want to imitate Jesus, there's no better way to do it than by showing mercy towards each other, by extending grace. Now, looking back, all right, looking at this, and that's why I said this one puts a smile on my face. Looking back over the course of Jesus' life, we know that the supreme act of mercy was him dying on the cross for us, right? It's not ever going to be, there's never going to be anything that exceeds that mercy, right? Okay, let's think back on the timing of Jesus delivering this message. What we're reading in Matthew chapter 5 comes before Jesus' death, burial, and resurrection, right? What does he tell this group of people? He says, I need you to be merciful. Why? They will be shown mercy. Think he did it? Absolutely. But I find that so amazing, just looking back on the timing of everything. He says, look, I need you to show mercy, because eventually you're going to be shown mercy. And he absolutely did that. He calls for us to do the same. He calls for us to do the same today. Now, obviously, we can't show the mercy to the magnitude that Christ showed us. However, we absolutely have the ability to show mercy, to extend grace to someone who doesn't deserve it. By us exhibiting mercy on others, we can really become just a walking display of God's mercy on us. All right, let's move on to verse 8. It says, "Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God." One of the main themes or underlying messages, if you want to call it that, from Jesus throughout the Beatitudes, really the Sermon on the Mount is about heart and focusing on the heart. That's kind of one of the things that I said at the beginning. Here, Jesus specifically calls it out. He says, "Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God." Again, I want you to think about the audience here and what's been the custom, what they've been accustomed to, all their lives. Up to this point, it's always been a huge emphasis on what's seen externally, from the scribes, Pharisees. It's all about appearance. It's all about, look at what I've done. Look at, it's all about me. Now, Jesus says, I want you to look elsewhere. The heart, it's obviously the center of our bodies. It's what drives us physically, but it's also what drives us spiritually. I want to read a couple of different sections here, a couple different verses. The first one is in Matthew chapter 15, verses 18 through 20. Matthew 15, verses 18 through 20. "But what comes out of the mouth proceeds from the heart, and this defiles a person. For out of the heart come evil thoughts, murder, adultery, sexual immorality, theft, false witness, slander. These are what defile a person." All right, so in another section I want us to look at, Matthew chapter 12, verse 34. Matthew 12, verse 34. And it says, "You brood of vipers, how can you speak good when you're evil? For out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks." Jesus tells us who we really are is indicated by what's in our hearts. The question is, and this is going to be the most important question that I ask you throughout this video. This is going to be the most important one, the one that I really want you to think about the most. What's in your heart? I can't answer that for you. I can't. I can answer that for me, and that's it. Your best friend, whoever your best friend is, he or she can't answer that for you. She doesn't know. Be honest with yourself. Over the next few days, really think about it. What's on your heart? What are your priorities, and where does God rank at? In order for our hearts to be pure, the way that Jesus is talking about here, in order for our hearts to be clean, we've got to make sure that it's emptied of all the other things that are in our lives before we can put God in it. Notice that, and I don't want us to overlook this one. At the end of verse 8, he says, "For they will see God. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God." Do you ever think about that? Do you ever really think about seeing God? We think, about seeing God today. Where do you see God? You see God in, different things in nature and wherever else. But really seeing Him physically, I think Jesus is talking eternally here, not just temporarily here. All right, let's move on to the next one. Verse number 9. It says, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God." Now, what is Jesus referring to as a peacemaker here? Notice he says peacemaker and not just peacekeeper. There's a huge difference here. He's referring to people that are actually strive to end any kind of hostilities and to bring the opponents together. This isn't just about being a peaceful person, okay? It's not just, being, somebody that just lives a peaceful life. That's not just, that's a good thing, but that's not what Jesus is talking about here about being a peacemaker. It's about being one that generates peace. You don't need me to tell you that this world that we're living in now is full of a lot of unpeaceful things right now. Everyone has their opinion of what's behind all these conflicts that's going on. Now, there's lots of stuff going on right now, but everybody's got their opinion of what causes it. Some's going to blame the economy. Some will blame education. Some will blame the president. Some's going to blame the virus. The root of of all of our problems now, and all the problems throughout the course of time, the root of every problem is one thing, and it's sin. And it will always be sin. That's going to be the root of all of our problems. Jesus is telling them 2,000 years ago, and he's telling us now, look, I need you to be the ones who generate peace, because there's always going to be sin. And there's always going to be conflicts as a result of all this sin that's out there. And I need you as my followers, I need you as Christians to be ones that actively pursue peace and generate peace. That's what he's asking of us. Jesus was the chief peacemaker, the one who's given them this command. He's the chief peacemaker. He's the one that made peace really between God and man. I think this means not necessarily just settling disputes. I think it means teaching and really just displaying peace throughout everything that we do. We need to constantly ask ourselves if we are contributing to peace. There's enough bad floating, around out there to bring us down, but it's important that we as Christians are focusing on the good. Ask yourself this question: are you seen as one that promotes peace? Are you one that contributes to peace, or are you one that contributes to issues, to drama, to problems? The world has plenty of that right now being passed around. Plenty of drama being passed around right now. Don't be one that contributes to problems, that contributes to any kind of confrontational issues. Be the one that contributes to peace. All right, let's move on to the last one. The last one's actually in the last three verses. There's only one beatitude that I want to focus on here. I think that's the one that he's talking about. But it's in verses 10 through 12, and I'll read those. It says, "Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me." Verse 12, "Rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven. For the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you." He states the beatitude in verse 10. That's three verses there, but I think the beatitude is that we need to focus on is 10. And in verses 11 and 12, he's kind of elaborating or kind of expanding what he's talking about in verse 10. This last beatitude is really a result of what happens after we do these others. Whenever we look at verses 3 through 9, whenever we do all these, or whenever we do these, individual or whatever, Jesus is saying, expect this. Expect this. And, it's, Jesus is, he tells them, he says, look, after you are poor in spirit, and after you mourn over your sin, when you're meek, then when you pursue righteousness, if you have a pure heart, and if you're a peacemaker, then everything will be easy, right? Then it'll be sunshine and rainbows all your life, right? No, that's not what he says. He says, look, when you do these things, you're going to be persecuted. Whoa, now, wait, you tell me to do all these things, and then you're saying that people are going to persecute me? Yeah, that's what Jesus is telling them. It's probably not what the group was expecting to hear. It's not what they were wanting to hear, but this is absolutely what they needed to hear. Why should we expect to be persecuted today? Why should you and I expect to be persecuted after living this lifestyle that Jesus is telling us to live? Why should we expect it? Because it's not normal. Because it's not the same lifestyle that the rest of the world is trying to adopt right now. Just look at the media today. This is not the lifestyle that's being promoted right now. People who don't value what you and I are trying to live, the way that Jesus is talking about, they'll see our lifestyle really as a condemnation on the way that they're living. And, some may even try to belittle us, or some may, try to get us to conform to the world and to the way that they're living. Maybe some, call us, the holier than thou group. One thing I want you to think about, keep in mind that this audience that Jesus is talking to, as he delivers these words, they're going to face a lot more persecution than you and I are going to face. hopefully we'll never see any kind of persecution like what some of these people encountered. But even if we do face persecution, or when we face persecution, just be ready for it. To me, this beatitude is the hardest test. It's one thing to change your attitude, and one thing to change your habits. It's another thing to stand up for what you believe in. And speaking of this is a really good beatitude to stress to kids, especially those that's in high school, those getting ready to go off to college. This beatitude right here, this is one I would camp out in, because peer pressure is tough at all ages, and they're constantly being pulled in all directions. It is our responsibility to stand for what we believe in and to stand for our Christian values. And it's not easy to do these things whenever our morals and our values, the things that we hold dear, and the things that we read about right here that we strive to maintain every day. It's not easy when those just seem to be, part of, it's just kind of a byproduct, just something that's an afterthought to the rest of the world and to a lot of people that we encounter. However, it's our responsibility to stand for what Jesus is telling this group, what he's telling us today too. Also, it's important to pray for those who are persecuting us. And that's not an easy thing to do either. The fact that we're being persecuted just proves that we're faithful. Don't overlook verse 12. Just don't overlook verse 12. He says, rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven. For the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you. Even though we'll face hardships, it will be worth it. I think 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 17 kind of sums this last part up pretty well. It says, for our light and momentary troubles are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all. Yes, we may see some persecution. Will things get worse? They might. But whatever comes our way, the end will be worth it. It'll be worth it. The Beatitudes is an amazing section of the New Testament. Great section, of the whole Sermon on the Mount. Just an awesome kind of opening to it. It's one that's challenging for us, but it's one that I think maybe we dismiss and maybe overlook a little too often. Why? Because it's pretty hard to achieve sometimes. Jesus is asking for a change in our hearts. He's asking for it today. Not just an outward difference, because those are just temporary, the outward ones. We all need to evaluate our hearts and really think about what's on our hearts and see maybe there's some changes that need to be made. I want us to focus on the traits in these Beatitudes. I'm gonna list these, and I want you to think about these. Okay, if you've got to write them down, do that. But I want you to think about these. These are traits that Jesus specifically listed out in these Beatitudes: poor in spirit, being mournful, being meek, hunger and thirst for righteousness, being merciful, being pure in heart, and being a peacemaker. I want you to think about those things, over the course of the next few days. Pick a couple of these and just see how you can work on those today. How can you work on those today? And then just go down the list and just see how you can make yourself apply these things in your life, and how you can strive to make these part of your lifestyle, because this is what Jesus is asking of us, and this is what he's expecting of us. Well, I appreciate y'all taking the time to watch the video. Again, this next week we'll probably pick up where we left off here after the Beatitudes, and just kind of work through the Sermon on the Mount, until we all get to join each other in the auditorium again on Wednesday nights. But if y'all don't mind, let's close in prayer. Our God, we love you so much. We thank you for loving us too. God, we thank you for the book of Matthew. We thank you so much for your Son, for his love, for his grace, for his mercy. And we thank you for the life that he lived. And we thank you for these words that we got to study tonight in the book of Matthew. God, we thank you for this perfect plan that you have for us. We thank you for the words that's just specifically stated for us as our guidebook to live. God, help us to live this way. God, you know what's on our hearts even better than we do. Maybe some of us need some help with getting rid of some bad things in our life, some of the things that pull us away from you. Lord, whatever our weaknesses are, just help us to get rid of those weaknesses. Help us to put you first in our lives and through everything that we do. God, we love you. We thank you for sending your son to die for us. God, just help us to be more like him. It's in his name that we pray. Amen. Thank y'all. Hope y'all have a good night.